Well, everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like. Mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Get healthy. Get healthy. I mix what I like, what I like.
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy liked and other cool things.
What's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Please do like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, tag me at I Mix What I Like, tag Black Liberation Media, BL Media, and all the links in the show description. And let's stay connected beyond this moment. Please invite folks to join you. As Ear Doctor says, tell a friend, tell a friend. I think we're going to have some fun this morning. And yeah, I hope, welcome Total Revolution. I hope you're talking about the exclusive Vivir Mi Vida Go-Go remix. That's DC Vibe, the Vibe band here in DC, in a blend mix with Mark Anthony's Vivir Mi Vida. We're going to sing, we're going to dance, we're going to live our lives. Yeah, a little special mix I put together some years ago in an attempt to create a go-go salsa anthem. And that's all that survived. But love it, love it, love it. Elon, peace. Good morning. Good to see you and many others the other day at Curb Fest. Please do check the discussion with Dr. Burton, Orasami Burton, that we had there. A lot of good people were in attendance. It was a great time. And I'm looking forward to this morning too. Happy Labor Day, everybody. Shout out to all the workers of the world. You unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. To those who will see this later, maybe because you are working or because you just wanted the day off, didn't want to get up in the morning, peace to you as well. I'm up early. This is I love watching the sunrise. And I am no longer, I don't really, although I don't, and I love to tribute the labor movement, despite not doing it that often. Likewise, Elon, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Craig. Yeah, Dr. Burton, man, I'm telling you, that tip of the spear is just vicious. Thank you, DC Joe Black. Right on. We try to, change it up here a little bit, keep it fresh. Hey, may the children that lost their lives for some people to not wear white today rest. Right on, right on, right on. Workers of all lands unite, no doubt. And shout out even to members of my family, many of whom I really didn't know very well, including my grandmother on my mother's side, who was a communist labor organizer in New York. She actually did work. I just found this out very recently. She did work with many of the women who lost their lives at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. She had been organizing to help those women. My grandmother did that. I remember as a kid, my mother, and I didn't understand it at the time. My mother told me to go iron some clothes, and I was like, ugh. And my mother went into this thing. Imagine being my mother who had to iron other people's clothes 18 hours a day. And I, just kind of went one in ear out the other, but that's the work she was doing. She was doing that kind of work, and she organized. And there's somewhere, I got to find it. We do have it somewhere. There's an audio recording of her promoting on local radio in Brooklyn, I think in the 30s, some effort to organize the tenants of her Fort Greene project. So my even an uncle who I'm not close with at all did a lot of labor organizing. Her son, my father was a co-founder of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. So I mean, and worked with AFSCME until the end of his life. So there's always been this appreciation in my household for this work. And but so I want to start there. But so I'm trying to do this again, this chapter on really the history of the modern history, I guess you could say, of the narrative around Black capitalism. And so again, not an economist, as a sort of combination of a media and Africana studies scholar. I'm very interested in that confluence. For today, we're going to focus on one little aspect of it, again, centering the work of Elizabeth A. Fawns Wolfe in the book Selling Free Enterprise, which I just heard referenced in a recent lecture by a Cornell University professor who's done some more recent work on the history of the rise of the redefinition of the phrase free enterprise, where he builds off of her work as well. So I'm glad I'm not the only one still working with it. But there are three basic or four basic points that I wanted to make today, before we get to the fun part of watching some of these cartoons, which are just wild. The inherent tensions created by capitalism between labor and ownership are targeted for balancing by propaganda. Society is only held together by propaganda. This is an argument I've felt for a long time, but I want to start developing a little bit more, and adding myself to. I'm obviously not the first one to come up with this approach, but in other words, all of these tensions just can't racial, gender, class, labor. The only thing keeping us, as Nick Hanauer said, from raising the pitchforks and coming after the billionaires is narrative, is propaganda. At this point, everybody's clear. There's no illusions anymore about inequality or the insufficiency of our own labor experience, or worse, just a horrible labor experience. I mean, a lot of people are just clear, but the only thing keeping us from doing what we need to do about it are the narratives. So today I wanted to focus a little bit on the history of some of these narratives and what appear to be, as I'll come to in just a minute with another one of these core points, our own naturally arrived at objectively reasoned conclusions are really not our own. Today, another sort of minor point I'd like to sort of, Labor Day, as are most holidays, is itself a co-optation meant to balance by way of distortion the contradictions caused by exploited labor, and ultimately to erase memory of the labor movement and ongoing struggle. This day is not meant to commemorate the labor movement. If you look at some of the national discussion, mainstream discussion, the promotion, obviously the sales, Labor Day is what they've done is co-opt the labor movement by claiming credit for the American worker and what the American worker did to contribute to this wonderful, perfect society. So it's a slick distortion. The movement to free labor has been suppressed, erased, and commemorated by a holiday which further exploits workers by claiming, in addition to material extraction, the symbolism of their contribution to this quote-unquote great country. So a third point I'd like to make this morning, again, just as we sort of watch indirectly this point being made, Black capitalism and its symbolizing Black liberation is a very white-derived idea and one meant to forever prevent meaningful change. Speaking of meaningful change, please check, big shout out to the Earn Your Liberation Rational Radicals collabo last night featuring Skip Coon's listening party for his new album August on Diallo's channel. Please, I'll make sure it's in the show description if you haven't seen. Please go check it out. Not only do you get some fun conversation, but you get to see Skip Coon sort of take us through with photographs from Brother Tafari, his biography, his autobiography. And then the album is flawless. It is, as we were saying and coining, I think last night, with due credit to Geechee, who wanted to make sure he gets it. And I'm not mad at that because I do the same thing. It is unskippable. Skip Coon's album is unskippable. And one of the points he makes is just that last one in a variety of ways that our arguments for liberation, what I'm describing today is it focused on Black capitalism, is a very white derived idea and one meant to prevent meaningful change. And then sort of lastly, because this came up in my classes again, there's always, I was a cliche as a student. I'm a cliche as a faculty member, more and more every day. But there's always a cliche of a couple of students in my classes that struggle I think a lot of us struggle, but who overtly and sometimes aggressively struggle against my argument. And because I admit a bias, do not claim objectivity, and encourage disagreement and conversation, sometimes it gets, but I draw some of this out, and it's, so I made a note here that it's weird to hear, as we're going to by the end of this show, this very white male affluent message created in the 1950s be voiced verbatim in the arguments of Black and poor youth in 2024. It's, and I mean that literally, these arguments, these pro-business, pro-corporate, pro-capitalist arguments, these anti-labor arguments are voiced. Okay. So, but before we get to that, as what I do want to do is again center this. I'm loving this. I just love this book, Selling Free Enterprise: The Business Assault on Labor and Liberalism, 1945 to 1960. And this is sort of a core turning point where I'm starting my look at this rise of this Black capitalist narrative. This is again extending, because at this point, you know, I don't have the at the moment, I need to try to extend pre-existing work and build from it. But it's something that I really did want to try to do, at least. So this chapter is at least helping me attempt to organize or to do this. But it's, for me, it's always just a struggle. But after the Second World War, the United States coming out benefiting from what Russia did and actually winning the war, benefiting from the fact that Germany destroyed Europe, benefiting from the fact that had the Japanese not bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States might not have gotten involved at all, at least not directly, benefiting from the fact, business-wise, that also IBM and Ford were making money for the American business community selling technology to Hitler. All of that left the United States in this unique position to be in charge. And one of the first things that they had to do, what this book really highlights, is retrain the United States worker and citizen back to the corporate formation, the righteousness of the corporate world, and of course, capitalism. Because what people had witnessed during the war was government getting involved, nationalizing industry, creating a situation where you had more workers doing more work for more pay to produce more, all for the war effort. But after the war, the capitalist corporate world, the business community, as Franz Wolf writes, said that they were near catastrophic civil war in having to suppress labor and get everybody back in line with private enterprise, so-called free enterprise, so-called free labor, so on and so forth. It is something I certainly never really focused on and fully appreciated, and I'm just evolving in a better appreciation for this particular moment. So I looked at a little bit of the post-war rise of the intelligence community, its involvement in entertainment, its involvement in constructing a Black American narrative. But this particular point, in terms of suppressing the whole labor force, was not something I fully appreciated. And as she points out, in fact, quote, with specific effect of moving 90% of Black Americans who had been by the end of the Second World War supporting government intervention towards the hopeless, bottomless pit of entrepreneurialism, while those who ruled to capture the apparatus of government for their own purposes. All right. I think, let me get the exact quote, because I think that was my note. But this is sort of the black subset of this issue is what she writes about on page 17. That the crisis, in fact, the chapter is subtitled, I think, or is titled Catastrophic Civil War, because that's the quote. In fact, here's the first. During the winter of 1945-46, a strike wave of massive proportions swept the United States. To many American employers, these strikes signaled that a grave social, political, and economic crisis threatened the free enterprise system. By January 1946, business writer Whiting Williams proclaimed that what originally seemed an inconvenient but more or less harmless series of industrial disputes has now become so widespread, so threatening, as to look like nothing less than catastrophic civil war. Because workers were saying, why do you want to send us back to having no rights and having no jobs and having suppressed wages and all of that, when we've just seen that during the war, you could hire more women, you could hire more Black people, you could hire more workers, period. You could raise wages. They're in here talking about in the this was, I think, even before. Yeah, they're talking about in 1944, Thomas Roy Jones, president of American Type Founders, a union, foresaw no limit to the future demands of power-hungry labor leaders. I'm sorry, he was a businessman who was mad at the labor leaders. Quote, annual wages, private social security systems, early retirements, long vacations, 25-hour weeks are completely within the realm of economic possibility. If business did not stop this trend, Roy predicted, a condition of industrial chaos eventually will ensue. What they call industrial chaos, imagine we're in 2024. This is 1944. And in 2024, they were worried about American workers coming back from this war and wanting to stick to a situation and advancing their rights in their to the point where Social Security, although private, but increased annual wages, early retirements. I'm about to turn 53. I'm ready. I mean, enough already. What I got to keep going to work for. And my job, I actually like my job, but still, what I got to keep going to work for. I like teaching in the classroom. Actually, I love teaching in the classroom. Let me just clarify that. But what I got to work for, early retirement, long vacations, 25-hour work weeks were predictable. And when it came to, as I was finally trying to get to, where Black people were in the survey by 1935, this is 1935, a Fortune magazine, this is before the World War. Fortune magazine survey found that the vast majority of employees convinced that the government should assume responsibilities, quote, never seriously contemplated prior to the New Deal. In the survey, 81% of those classified lower middle class, 89% of those classified as poor, and 91% of Blacks endorsed the statement that the government should see to it that every man who wants to work has a job. So this was part of what Franz Wolf is tracing, that before the war and certainly by the end of the Second World War, workers were saying that government should be involved. Government should play a role. And then what the war proved is that when the government gets involved, it absolutely can organize industry to be massively productive, have workers employed all over the place, making good wages, and to a point where they saw on the horizon a labor world that we're nowhere near. Almost 100 years later, we're nowhere near. And in this, what she's tracing in this chapter, in this potentially catastrophic civil war, or this fear that was being struck into what did he say that would ensue? Some how did he describe it? I don't know. Anyway, catastrophic civil war, but the point being that they're so terrified that they engage, as she covers throughout the rest of the book, in massive propaganda and psychological warfare to fix all of this, to get people away from government being involved, to get away from focused on labor being involved, or labor improving. They develop, among other things, that is the business community, the Business Advisory Council, the Committee for Economic Development. These corporate leaders were less concerned with protecting competition. They sought to moderate the New Deal, not destroy it. In contrast with Roosevelt's New Deal, that was itself a compromise to prevent socialism. It was a compromise with the business community, and then the business community thought it could manage it to make the best of it. But that was one group. Another group of leaders, in contrast, Committee for Economic Development founders like Marion Folsom of Eastman Kodak, Ralph Flanders, and Paul Hoffman of Studebaker Automobile Company looked to central economic planning, although primarily influenced by business, to ensure prosperity. Hoffman borrowed the line from National Association of Manufacturer Conservatives when he dramatically warned in 1943 that collectivism would come to post-war America. So they wanted to manage what they assumed was a coming collectivism. This is wild. However, he certainly shocked conservatives when he claimed that its source would be businesses' failure to protect against mass unemployment through planning. To Hoffman, it would more likely come by default than by design on part of revolutionaries. This reminds me of Aptheker's Negro Slave Revolts book, where he talks about how the slaveocracy said, we have to end slavery on our terms or these Africans are going to end it on their own. And they've been looking to this day to manage that so-called freedom so that it benefits the ruling elite. And the ruling elite today make way more money through this version of labor relations than they did under plantation slavery. So the cessation of more overt brutality was not to benefit and to create a liberation for the African, for the laborer. It was to benefit and ease the extraction and to increase the extractive capability of those in charge. And then to fill that void, they've only been using propaganda and narrative development with the support of education, so on and so forth. But so he's saying the same thing here. We can't have no collective planning. We have to have what is today the Business Roundtable, an extension of all of these groups who say that the collectivism can't be communist and based on labor. It has to be capitalist and based on the goals and the will of that class. Okay. Oh my goodness. So by the end of the book, what she's describing, that is Fawn's Wolf, in simple terms, as they said, is the goal post-World War II for business was an, quote, intellectual reconquest of America. Page 285. In 1959, labor journalist Bert Cochran observed that the businessman's intellectual reconquest of America after World War II was a more remarkable achievement than was his reassertion of long exercised power after World War I. In 1945, business faced an aggressive labor movement that sought to reassert New Deal liberalism. Unions called for full employment, social planning, and the expansion of the welfare state, essentially a reorientation of American society orchestrated through the continued growth of labor and state power. The business community had a different agenda. It sought not only to recast the political economy of post-war America, but also to reshape the ideas, images, and attitudes through which Americans understood their world. Prosperity, they argued, would be achieved best through reliance on individual initiative and the natural harmony of workers and managers that business saw as inherent in the free enterprise system. According to many industrialists, the socially responsible capitalism relying on increases in productivity and economic growth rather than on redistribution of income would solve society's problems and bring the good life to all. You know what that is. I don't even know why I don't have it ready and why StreamYard hasn't streamlined this studio.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
They were clear. We're going to use messaging, narrative development, omission of discussion of any of this history, and create this world where people will literally show up in my classroom in 2024 and tell me, you don't need redistribution. You just need business to do more, to make more. I had 2 Black students, 1 man, 1 woman, unified in defense last week of Jeff Bezos. Ain't no problem with him making hundreds of billions of dollars, Dr. Ball. We just have to produce more so that more money is made. They didn't use the word trickle down, but to trickle down to the workers. And he deserves it because it was his initiative and hard work that set this whole thing together. And the workers, the technology, the pre-existing education, the society we all construct and create that gives him the room to do all. None of that is important. The only important thing is that we do not get involved in redistribution. And this is part of what they described as the intellectual reconquest of America in post-World War II. The labor movement could never match the resources available to the leaders of American business. And because as she acknowledges, and as others, propaganda is, as an idea, is neutral. Labor movement engaged in propaganda. In fact, she shows examples of this. In fact, you'll note, and we'll come back to this point, if you can see this cartoon, let me see if I can, if you're able to see this cartoon, it's speaking to an issue that is going on right now, so-called with Kamala Harris and price fixing. That this is an early business bit of propaganda produced by the National Association of Manufacturers, where it says in 1946 they spent over $3 million on public relations campaign to end price controls. And why were there price controls? Because obviously during the war, you have to limit costs, redistribute the wealth being created to cover the workers. Less emphasis on profit, more emphasis on worker conditions and productivity. After the war, no, we got to get rid of all of that. And even though Kamala Harris was so unfamiliar with the concept that she initially, in one of those, I think she was almost like a Freudian slip where she said she wanted to prevent price gauging. I think she was trying to read from the script, which probably meant to say gouging. But she said gauging because she was so unused to it. But what she was responding to was the business community telling her, no. You cannot, we're not gouging. We need unfixable prices. So but what Franz Wolf is ultimately saying is that the labor movement couldn't match the resources of the American leaders of business. As a result, the political and cultural landscape of the post-war era was increasingly dominated by the images and ideas produced by a mobilized business leadership. This indeed marked the businessman's intellectual reconquest of America. How far this reconquest went, how deeply rooted it was, remains unclear. We know what business leaders wanted workers and other Americans to believe. Moreover, we know that the images and ideas of business were pervasive, filling much of America's cultural space with a series of selectively distorted symbols that made it difficult, if not impossible, for Americans to discover and articulate competing visions of the American polity. To this degree, at least, the businessman's intellectual reconquest of America succeeded. Absolutely. And this book is written, I think the updated edition is early 90s, 94. By now it's a wrap. And this is, I mean, we're at the point where I fear Barrett Brown is close to correct, that we're at a point where we're not even able to communicate ideas about fighting. We're almost impossible. It's almost impossible to communicate ideas that a fight is still necessary or worthwhile, because the pervasiveness of these distorted symbols by today are, I mean, 1994 is, and I was a almost a full grown adult, early 20s adult. And the world is nothing. Communicatively, it is nothing like it was in 94. So, and it's interesting because shout out to Black Men Build. I was asked if I could answer a question about that. The details are not important, but it involved a discussion of Herman and Chomsky's manufacturing consent. And I essentially said we need to have a conversation. It's so much more. I don't think I could condense this to an email. I'm having a hard time condensing any of this to a chapter, or organizing my thoughts for a chapter. But in revisiting it for this chapter, that is the propaganda model, it still works. So in terms of, that is the model that was evolved as they describe it, Herman and Chomsky, that describes the media environment that was already at play in the early 90s, that has metastasized at this point in a way that is still relevant and maybe even more effective. So the short of it is, and I'll just pull this up here, because this is sort of, if I'm connecting the dots, this is how, from Fons Wolf's argument, we bridge the communications gap to where we are today. So how did the business community fully organize? We're going to look at some of the early work, but the model they constructed, or that was evolved in terms of a media environment to concretize that process. So after the Second World War, there's this initial need to the reconquest intellectually the United States to get people to disassociate the value of government involving itself in organizing labor and nationalizing industry, to get them back on the individual private enterprise model that focuses and allows for untold profits, no price fixing, no redistribution, no government involvement other than to protect the industries in question, and let's just go. Successive generations would have to be held and reaffirmed in that, as many of us would be born into a world where that initial stage had already sort of taken effect. And those of us in the 80s, where we watched sort of the further destruction of unions, and it's good to see some return of them. We were raised up in a media environment described here by the propaganda model from Herman and Chomsky and manufacturing consent, that again organizes that intellectual reconquest that had taken place after the Second World War. So as they say here, the mass media serve as a system for communicating messages and symbols to the general populace. So the symbols that Fons Wolf is saying needed to be disturbed and manipulated, and were initially, how do you organize and maintain that? So they just talk about, just oversimplifying here, how the propaganda model works in 5 filters. And as they point out, it is much more difficult to see a propaganda system at work where the media and where the media are private and formal censorship are absent. So in other words, as Chomsky would often say, propaganda is to democracy what violence is to totalitarianism. This is sort of where that's coming from. The more you tell a society that it's free, the more you claim a democracy and that everything is, again, private, there's no formal censorship, you have freedom of speech, the more you have to propagandize them. So a propaganda model focuses on the inequality of wealth and power and its multi-level effects on mass media interests and choices. So again, perfect to extend from Fons Wolf's point about suppressing labor consciousness. This doesn't deal per se with the specifics of colonized populations, culture, race, or any other the other forms of exploitation that are targeted, but the labor component specifically, where again wealth in where inequality of wealth and the power that is generated from that is the focus. So the propaganda model traces the routes by which money and power are able to filter out the news fit to print. That is, what news is fit to print, as the New York Times would often say at the time, marginalize dissent and allow the government and dominant private interests to get their messages across to the public. The filters they focus on: size, the size, concentrated ownership, owner wealth, and profit orientation of dominant mass media firms. So certainly at the time they were writing, this was an issue. By today, it's even more of an issue, in particular with the internet as the mediated space being so tightly controlled and owned by private interests, locked up with government support, that with untold wealth being made from all the data they're mining and so on and so forth, and the surveillance capitalism that's going on, it's massive. The advertising, number 2, advertising is the primary income source of mass media. That is still, on a material level, still the case. I want to say there's an immaterial, because I'm not entirely sure that more money isn't coming from the intelligence community and the military industrial complex in terms of media, communications technology, etc. I'm not entirely sure that they're driving it more than the advertising community. They may be in league, certainly, and benefiting as much immaterially as anyone in terms of narrative development, propaganda, and so on. But in terms of the practical sort of day-to-day, who's determining what kinds of messages we see in media, advertisers are still dominant. Number 3, the reliance of media on information provided by government, business, and experts funded and approved by these primary sources as agents of power. Again, very much still the case today, where certainly mainstream commercial media outlets rely not only on advertising, and in particular those targeting Black audiences, but they rely often as well on the so-called experts that are coming from the business and government community, the so-called message force multipliers, who are paid, or whose job it is to be present to multiply whatever the dominant message of the day or the time is. Number 4, flack as a means of disciplining the media. That is, if you have the ability to either punish people by withholding resources for negative coverage, or produce negative coverage of your target population, And this is still a major issue today, where whether it's podcasting, YouTube, certainly dominant commercial media, there is an ability and a need to punish those who are critical of those outlets, critical of accepted government narrative, and then also the ability to defend against criticism or the flack that comes from an audience by either redirecting the narrative, just suppressing those voices, or producing through message force multiplication your narrative as a greater, more dominant one. And then lastly, anti-communism as a national religion and control mechanism, whether it's to marginalize dissent, to set limits on the political range. We certainly see that now during an election cycle. You cannot go too far to the left without being demonized. You cannot advocate certainly more redistribution or democratic control of the wealth produced by society without being demonized as a communist. And again, I saw this again last week in my own classroom. Any positive reference to communism or socialism was, whoa. It was almost as and then I doubled down by being open about being an atheist, and it just went overboard. But the anti-communism that was visceral, doesn't require study, doesn't require an understanding of capitalism or communism. It just requires a visceral reaction to an already generated anti-communist narrative. And we talked a little bit about it, whether it's putting "In God We Trust" in 1936, I believe, in the Pledge of Allegiance. No, the national anthem was adopted, I believe, in 1936 in its current form, officially, if I'm not mistaken. We were just looking this up. And by the 1950s, 51, "In God We Trust" was put in the Pledge of Allegiance to associate capitalism, democracy, and freedom first with each other, and then, of course, with God. And then communism, socialism, labor movements with Bolsheviks and atheists, the godless communists. So that was done as just a. And then even to this day, my own children were in public school were assigned still that anti-communist, anti-Mao book written by that I forgot the red woman, the girl in the red coat or whatever, the Chinese girl that escapes Mao and comes here to tell the tale of the wonders of capitalism. So everybody is still being primed against and as I'll be arguing in this chapter, the anti-communism that is this country's unofficial religion plays out targeting Black America as Black capitalism, as a promotion of Black capitalism as a solution. Now, I did just revisit this, but I'll it's in the show description, because when they mention the role of advertising, I do love this presentation that I always borrow from that Sutherland put together, where he talks about the prevailing models of the role of advertising. So the video of me talking about that is in the show description, but the point is, as he lays out here, why does advertising exist? How does advertising work? What effects does it have? Is that it manages the content, and then it raises questions about, or it sets the question of why do we end up with what we get? And he talks about the prevailing, that is the accepted sequence, that consumers get what they call for from commercial media, and therefore are only getting what they want. And as he says here, for the accepted sequence to be valid, it would have to be shown that consumer wants originate with consumers. and this is getting to this one of the main themes for me is where do our wants come from? Where are these ideas we claim are our own coming from? And he's right that the accepted sequence only makes sense if consumers, and that is whether we're talking about products or ideology, politics, that we consumers are some organized entity that convey our interests in an organized way to those who run major media, who then reflect those interests back to us. That's impossible. That's not what happens here. So what he ends up correcting and showing us is the corrected sequence. Whoops, I think I just went past it. The revised sequence, where you have so in the accepted sequence, you have the consumer that creates the market, that tells the producers what it wants, and then the producer goes and produces it for the market. But the revised sequence puts advertising in the middle, which creates the wants for the consumer that come from the producer. The producer needs to market its goods, its marketing, what it has the control over in terms of the means of production. It promotes its, and that again is whether we're talking about a car or an idea. So it is organized capital that can, in this case, produce and advertise its will to the world and convince consumers that, yeah, we do want no unions. We do want this level of inequality because we do recognize that our corporate rulers deserve their station because they've worked harder. They're smarter than we are. And then we somehow are convinced that we're telling the market and creating the market for ourselves, and the producers are only giving us what we ask for. So the propaganda model at least reminds us and puts us back on track that no, in terms of the content of mainstream media, and what I'm basically extending is into our media environment is the font and the extension of the will of a corporate capitalist ruling elite that have, going back to Franz Wolff, long wanted a situation where, again, concepts of unions, government oversight of redistribution, of distribution, nationalization of industry, all of that, we got to get rid of all of that. All right, so into this post-Second World War moment comes this guy, John Sutherland, who is able to sort of capture a moment where his animation skills his animation skills are able to find a home with his own conservative white male politics that happen to conform to the two dominant sectors of society that produce, oddly enough, the field of mass communication studies and a lot of what Dr. Burton was talking about in Tip of the Spear, the industry, the corporate ruling elite and the military industrial complex were very much interested in the animation skills of a John Sutherland, his ability to organize an artistic workforce into producing what we're going to be looking at, some of whom involved artists who created cartoons that a certain generation of us grew up on, that were produced before our generation, which is wild. And you'll see, some of you are just going to recognize some of this video anyway. The art for sure. Some of the videos themselves may be familiar because I think they used them in form or fashion for long after the 50s, and when they were initially created, or some of them were initially created. just like, like those early Bugs Bunny cartoons a lot of us grew up on had already been in production for 40 years. So it's this confluence of interests, the corporate ruling elite who want this business community that wants to redirect the interests of labor, the military that wants to obviously redirect not only the interests of labor, but of society. They come together and produce this reclamation project. So my note here, these fantasies of the role corporation. So we're going to see in these videos, I'm only going to show a couple of them, and in the link below, there's a couple hours of them, and I watched it. I couldn't stop watching. I thought, it was just hilarious, spooky, sad even, but also some kind of funny. These fantasies that we see in these videos of corporations aren't meant and cannot withstand. They weren't meant to and cannot withstand the test of time, and they do not age well. They did what they were meant to do, which was at the time of the post-World War II moment, solidify a mindset for the country, one that locks people into corporate and capitalist modes of thought. So as we're watching this, a lot of it for us, particularly some of our political sensibilities around here, but in general, for most of us, the propaganda is a little bit too overt, and it just doesn't make any sense anymore. But again, it was not meant to withstand. It was meant to create the foundation that withstands and confuses to this day. So let's see. The first one, what did I pick for this first one here? I don't even remember what this one, but I must have picked it for a good reason. So let's just start watching some cartoons. By the way, like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. Links in the show description. Put this in your socials. Tag Black Liberation Media on Twitter and elsewhere. Tag at Mix What I Like, and let's spread this around a little bit more. Get more folks back over here, or over here to Black Liberation Media. All right, and let's have a little bit of fun here. And I'm gonna come back to the chat in a little bit. I'm sure. All right, here we go.
Our business system has continued to provide a better life for our increasing population, in spite of destructive forces which have pounded against our foundation of freedoms with no avail. However, wars, or the threat of wars, interrupt the normal
wars
operations
and rumors
of
of war.
our business system. And may result in government controls which crack essential blocks in our foundation of freedom. In World War II, wages were controlled. Many workers were frozen to their jobs. Farm prices were controlled. And profits of business were limited. Raw materials were allocated between essential and non-essential business. On Main Street, USA, many of us found less to buy because a good portion of our productive capacity went to the war effort. Prices were fixed, and the available supply of goods was rationed. In war emergencies, we allow government to restrict certain of our freedoms. But we Americans have learned to remove government controls as quickly as possible, and to repair the blocks in the foundation of our freedoms to allow our business system to resume its normal operation.
So you could, so that's why I picked this one first, because this one sets the tone for the moment that I'm talking about, that Franz Wolf is talking about. This is the transition from the Second World War, saying, look, you saw what was happening, right? This wasn't good for workers. They were forced to stay at their jobs that they were looking for, jobs that they were being better paid for, jobs that were producing a labor situation where they thought that we might end up with a 25-hour work week. But no, you're wedded to your job. This is terrible. Prices are fixed. We can't make the profit we want to make. This is a horrible nightmare. But our way of life has found the appropriate solution. Not revolution, not redistribution, certainly not the dreaded communism.
While we invest part of our savings to help finance the world's most efficient business system, at the same time we pay taxes to government to finance many kinds of services, which also contribute to our way of life. For example, our taxes must provide the necessary funds to improve and expand our school system. Our taxes must be sufficient to pay for city streets, health, fire, and police protection, and of course, aid to the needy. Our state taxes help pay for highways, educational institutions, and among other things, help to finance important experiments to increase the productivity of our farms. Our federal taxes pay for irrigation and reclamation projects, for national parks, postal services, the Weather Bureau, and many other services. Our taxes have to pay for the enormous cost of past wars and provide the funds for a defense program which will ensure the safety of our country. In addition, all of us should be willing to pay whatever taxes are necessary to enable efficient government to improve or expand any essential service.
And by us, we mean you.
Tax load, we should avoid pressuring government for any new services that aren't absolutely necessary. Because we all know the more our government provides, the more taxes it's forced to collect. None of us can escape. Big business, small business, farmers, workers, housewives, and all of us have to pay our share. Demanding more and more from government could create a tax burden heavy enough to crack essential blocks in the foundation of our business system. Therefore, we shouldn't let our taxes reach a point where they destroy our ability to save and invest. For as we have seen, our rising standard of living depends upon a constant flow of savings dollars into our business system each year.
Look at that red wave.
In the future of our country, waves of destructive forces will continue to batter against our foundation. When any force weakens the interlocked blocks of our political and economic freedoms, as good citizens, we must be quick to use the tools our Constitution gives us and repair any cracks that may appear. As long as we keep the foundation of our business system strong, we shall be able to maintain and improve the way of life our forefathers conceived and established. A way of life which gave everyone who came to this country the chance to progress according to his ability and enterprise. Like the youth of yesterday, the young people of today deserve the same opportunity to earn success and accomplishment. And on this foundation of freedoms, continue to build a better life for themselves and their fellow man in the world of tomorrow.
Hill. Shining city on a hill. So Sutherland, by the way, would have a long career of making stuff. I mean, he worked with, his videos were used in all kinds of major industry, and as we'll see here, the military as well. And as some of you note, I mean, the art looks familiar. It's got literally some of the animators worked with Disney and whoever else, so it has a very popular feel and appeal, and you could see why for certain segments of the population it would be effective. And you could see why to this day, as I'm saying, the talking points end up in my classroom.
America is many things to many people. To a 17-year-old kid, it's the malt shop on the corner. To Grandpa, it's the front porch in the cool of the evening. To Mother and her family, it's church on Sunday morning. And to Dad, it's his favorite relaxation.
Yeah, I think a lot of us
It's the Cracker Barrel philosophers in Crabtree Corners. And it's the tycoons in Wall Street. It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property. Security from unlawful search or seizure.
What you want, Flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines.
I don't even get that.
The right to vote. And to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Okay, so we got our freedom. But management's lousing up everything.
Labor is at fault. It's ruining the country. My constituents, as your elected representative, I can assure you Labor's right. Management's right. I'm strictly neutral.
Labor, management, politicians, phooey. They can't tell corn from oats.
Wait, only take the money out of it.
Hurry, step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ism. Ism will cure any ailment of the body politic. It's terrific. It's tremendous. Once you swallow the contents of this bottle, you'll have the bountiful benefit of higher wages, shorter hours, and security. Enormous profits, no strikes. Remember, you're the big boss. Government control, no worry about votes. Name your own salary. Bigger crops, lower cost. Why, ism even makes the weather perfect every day. And now then, because we are introducing this amazing item for the first time in this country, it isn't going to cost you 1 cent. All you have to do is sign this little scrap of paper, and you get your bottle absolutely free.
I hereby turn over to ISM Incorporated everything I have, including my freedom and the freedom of my children and my children's children, in return for which said ISM promises to take care of me forever.
Pardon me.
And who are you, my good man?
I'm John Q. Public.
Ah, my fine friend, you're just in time to share this generous and gigantic offer.
No, they mean communism.
Mind if I read it first?
Hurry up!
Keep your shirts on, boys.
Including my freedom. Freedom? What? Sign away my freedom? Why, this is ridiculous.
Don't be corny, brother.
Sure, our system of free enterprise isn't perfect. But before we throw it away for some imported double talk, let's turn the clock back a few years to see what it's done for us. For example, back in the 1890s, Joe Dokes was just a guy who liked to tinker around his barn. Some people thought Joe was lazy. Some even thought he was nuts. But one day, he had an idea. And because he was free to dream,
double talk.
Joe had a chance to make something of himself and his idea. So, of course, some people didn't think so much of Joe's idea. But that didn't stop him. So Joe got some money from young Aunt Minnie and Uncle Angus and Grandpappy and Mr. Titus.
And everybody has this access.
When Joe's friends and
start up
relatives
capital.
used their savings to help him buy tools and property, they were capitalists. Don't blush, folks. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Now, naturally, Joe needed some help. So he hired Willie Lumpkin, who was out of work anyway, and before long, Willie had the know-how and became skilled labor. Because capital, management, and labor worked together, Joe's idea grew. It grew and did things even he never dreamed of. Today, the automobile industry provides millions of jobs that never existed before. And remember, this is a story of only one industry. There are thousands more scattered all over the United States whose history of development is pretty much the same. We've built a country under the American system that sends more young people to high school and college than all the rest of the world combined. Why, even in the Depression, our wages bought more food, clothing, travel, and entertainment than the wages of any other people in the world.
Buying power.
Our country has a national income equal to the total national incomes of any other sixth nation in the world. With only 7% of the Earth's people, we drive 70% of the world's automobiles. That's just a sample of the things the capitalistic system has given us in only 160 years. Before signing up, you boys ought to try a little taste of Dr. Ism's formula to see what you'd get in exchange for your freedom. Go ahead, try it.
You can't do this to me! I'll strike!
The state forbids strikes.
Wait till the union hears about this!
Ah, yes, the union. Welcome to our ranks, number 1313.
I'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No more private property. No more you.
Wow.
The farm voters put a stop to this.
Farmers don't vote anymore.
What'll they do for seed next year?
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on.
We don't have farming subsidies.
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything.
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance, you know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
And now, gentlemen, no violence, please. And don't throw those bottles. Don't throw those bottles.
Working together to produce an ever greater abundance of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity.
Yeah. And so I'm going to make sure when we watch the next one that you see, because I don't think it showed up very clearly, maybe it wasn't on this one, but where you can see, okay, so this one was a product of Harding College. And, but these next ones, but the propaganda, I mean, the messaging was clear. This communism stuff is just going to destroy everything. and it's going to take away your freedom. And we hear the same arguments today about it's the radicals. And by the way, Harding College is a Christian liberal arts college. I forgot to mention that point. In Searcy, Arkansas. And it was founded in 1924 to, you know, be a Christian college. So there was, and by the way, Franz Wolf talks about this. This is another part of the book. So she talks about how the messaging was carried out, and that is the post World War II capitalist message, and so much of it went through education. It went through obviously media, propaganda. It went through, it was funneled through military promotion, so on and so forth. But a good chunk of it was funneled through the conservative church, that which was itself already organized as a funnel for this narrative. And again, attaching godliness to capitalism was part of the. So it makes perfect sense that a Harding College would have been involved, just as is in these next ones, I believe, or one of these, the Air Force, the Chamber of Commerce, who was obviously involved in terms of my own focus with John H. Johnson and the promotion of the Selling the Negro documentary, promoting Black capitalism as a post-World War solution to any leftover problems. So don't get into the race stuff. Don't get into that class division stuff. That's class warfare. That's the race card. That's all that. That's identity politics. That's, you know, don't do that, because all you need is some good business and American capitalism. So, all right, let's look at, speaking of buying power, the buying power of the American worker, another Harding College, John Sutherland production.
Meet Joe, the king of the workers of the world.
Hi, folks.
Joe's the king because he can buy more with his wages than any other worker on the globe.
Message!
Now, what makes it possible for Joe to earn such a good living? He's no smarter than workers in other countries.
Are you kidding?
He's no stronger than workers in other lands.
Oh, yeah? Well, just watch me.
Just because Joe's an American doesn't mean...
Yeah? Well, being an American is the best thing on the... Oh! My back!
Sure, being an American is great, but how could you be superior to any foreigner when you or your folks might be any one of a dozen different races or religions? So, if you're no Superman, it must be the American way of doing things that makes you the luckiest guy in the world.
I don't think I'm so lucky.
You don't? Well, let me show you.
Hey, what's that gadget? Television?
No, it's a time machine. Just pull that lever. You'll see how people worked 100 years ago.
Hey, this I like.
Oh, that's too far back. Try again. We want to stop at 1850.
Who's the character?
That's your grandfather, Joe.
Oh,
He had to work 69 hours a week to earn a living because he had only inexpensive hand tools and his own strength to help him make things. Your grandfather was a powerful man, yet his strength equaled only 1/10 of a horsepower. You have hundreds of horsepower in this costly giant of a machine to multiply your strength and efficiency 1,000 times. This makes it possible for you to earn more than any worker in history. And still have leisure time each day to enjoy life.
So I'm lucky. But what about the rich guy who does nothing while I do the work?
True, there are rich people who contribute nothing. And there are poor people who contribute the same.
Yeah, see?
But most of the invested capital that buys the tools you use comes from your fellow Americans. 40 million of us have money in the banks. 70 million of us own insurance policies. Over 15 million of us invest savings in corporation stocks and bonds, which help to finance industry. Each year, the people of America invest billions of dollars to create new plants and equipment. This invested capital buys the tools which make a man's labor worth more because he produces more. In China, for example, where there is practically no capital available for investment in plants or tools, a man's labor is not worth very much. A coolie takes 10 days to move 10 gallons of kerosene 100 miles at a freight cost of 10 cents a gallon. An American railroad worker takes only 2 hours to move 100,000 gallons of kerosene 100 miles at a...
And so and we catch that, right? So there, even though there are a few lazy rich people, there's a bunch of lazy poor people, but it's the venture capitalists that make the difference in the end. So it's the lazy rich person getting fanned doing nothing, ultimately, without it being directly pointed to here, is the one driving all of this, making it better for the worker. So the absence of capital, the absence of capitalism is still the problem for the coolie and any other so-called unfortunate worker elsewhere in the world.
At a freight cost of 1 cent a gallon. The coolie makes 10 cents a day. An average American railroad worker makes $10 a day, or 100 times more than the coolie. The average railroad worker has the benefit of a $20,000 investment in equipment. The Chinese coolie's equipment is worth only 10 cents. With constant improvement in expensive tools and the skill to use them, the value of any man's labor can be multiplied many times. Naturally, the people in this country who invest their savings with industry expect dividends. No dividends, no investments. Without new capital each year to finance new plants, tools, and equipment, labor and management would soon find themselves in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, without capital to buy new tools, I might not do so good. But look what a new invention did to my grandpa. For 25 years, he knocks his brains out in the wagon works. Then along comes the gas company. Need I tell you what happened to Grandpa?
The history of our country proves that new inventions create thousands of jobs for everyone they displace.
That's
so
wild.
It wasn't long before your grandfather had a better job, had more pay for less work. Our industrial progress is largely the result of the competitive struggle between companies to capture the market to increase profits. Huge sums are spent each year to make a better product to sell for less. Yet, regardless of how much money is spent to develop a new idea, there is often failure. When research proves successful, everyone shares in the accomplishment. The business which fails to give the consumer as much value as a competitor gives often goes bankrupt. However, on a national scale, competition gives the greatest good to the greatest number by continually producing more and better goods at lower prices. The American way of doing things makes it possible for more people to own their own homes. We're only 7% of the world's population, but we have 50% of the radios. We have 54% of the world's telephones. Americans own practically all the refrigerators in existence. To give them plenty of ice, quickly and easily. Bathtubs, we've got 92% of them. Most of us have the leisure time to enjoy the peace and quiet of the beautiful countryside as we drive about in 72% of the world's automobiles.
That's how they made that a positive, though.
Under the protection of our freedoms, American labor, management, and capital, the greatest production team in the history of mankind, have made the United States the industrial master of the world. Capital must continue to provide industry with the funds to create new tools and plants. Labor and management must continue to increase the production of better goods at lower prices so that more people will be able to buy the things that make life easier and happier for all of us. Then Joe will continue to be the king of the workers of the world.
You said it, brother.
Wow. King of the workers of the world. I mean, that is just, all right. So we'll look at one more, but again, I made a day or two of it watching the whole set of these. I think one or two of them repeat in the video linked in the show description, but they are I don't know. It's what is it? The quintessential, the cliche of the car wreck you can't turn away from. And I was just trying to make sure that I found an example of because I was using screenshots of this to do a thumbnail where they talk about, where they show which ones are, or they show you that they're coming out of the Air Force in particular, and the Chamber of Commerce, and one or another corporation, but you get the gist, and you'll get the gist. So we'll watch one more, which is again speaks to, as I mentioned at the beginning, what's happening right now. This is another one from Harding College, but but it's all for the exact same purpose. Why play leapfrog? Prices and wages.
Wages and prices often play leapfrog. One jumps up, then the other, which means a steady rise in our cost of living. The Dilly Doll Factory is a happy shop. But Joe, our doll painter friend, seems to be a little down in the mouth, which even shows in his work.
Joe is pretty discouraged because the high cost of living makes it harder and harder to make ends meet.
Hiya, Joe, old boy.
Hello.
Better look in that envelope.
Wow, a raise! And just in time to buy the kid a birthday present. What'll I get? Let's see. A dress? Bicycle? Roller skates? Shoes? A book? A doll? A doll! What's the price, miss? I work in a factory that makes this doll. $2 is too much.
I'm very sorry, sir, but your company charged us more for this shipment, so we had to raise our selling price.
We got a wage increase, all right, but it couldn't raise the price that much. It just takes a little wood, rubber, paint, cloth, and a phony wig to make that doll. There's only about 10 cents worth of materials in the whole thing. You pirates, crooks, bandits, you robbers!
You're right about the cost of raw materials in that doll, about 10 cents worth. Raw materials in practically everything we buy are worth little until labor transforms them into finished products. For example, how much do you think the raw materials cost in that car?
Oh, about $300.
You've got a surprise coming. It takes 4.5 tons of coal, 2 3/4 tons of iron ore, 50 pounds of cotton, 14 pounds of cured and finished wool, aluminum, zinc, lead, copper, and countless other raw materials to make an
where do those
automobile.
raw materials come from?
Without the addition of labor costs, these things are worth about $22. The raw materials require the accumulated labor of thousands of people in countless crafts to transform them into a finished automobile. Miners dig the coal and iron ore. Railroad and maritime workers transport these materials to the steel mill, where workers convert the ore into finished steel. The wages of railroad workers add to the value of steel when it is transported to automobile factories. The cotton that goes into a car accumulates labor costs from the farmer who tills the soil, from workers who sow the seed, and help to raise the cotton. Wages paid to other workers add to the value of the cotton as it is moved from the field to the cotton gin where it is processed. Other workers transport the cotton to the automobile factory. The wool that is used to make a car is worth little while it is still on the sheep. When the labor cost of a sheep shearer is added, the value of the wool is increased by his wages. When all of the parts and materials finally reach the factory for assembly, the labor cost of automobile workers must be added to the price of the car. In the $1,500 automobile, direct and indirect labor costs add up to approximately $1,200, or over 80% of the selling price. That's before taxes. And what happens to the other 20%, or $300? Raw material cost, $22. Profit to producers of raw materials and allied industries, $89. Profit to part manufacturers, $47. Profit to local dealer, $77. Profit to car manufacturer, $65. Now, when you add $400 for taxes, the cost is $1,900 to the buyer.
Like the dolls you make, an automobile has a low raw material cost and a high labor cost, and that goes for practically everything we buy.
Oh, yeah? Well, what's the labor cost in a buck's worth of steak?
We'll start back at the farm where Bully Boy was raised. The selling price of meat has to include the labor cost in producing the feed, in building fences, and constructing housing for our animal friend. It takes a lot of costly care to get Bully Boy ready for the market. Wages have to be paid to railroad workers who provide our friend with care and courtesy on his way to the stockyards. Preparing Bully Boy's anatomy for the butcher shop costs money, too. The family butcher figures in his wages every time he sells a thick, juicy steak. Forgetting taxes for a moment, the labor cost in $1 worth of meat adds up like this. Workers raising beef, 24 cents. Transportation workers, 1/2 cent. Packing house workers, 42 cents. Meat delivery drivers, 1/2 cent. Butcher shop workers, 18 cents. The other 15 cents goes in profits to the retailers, the packers, allied industries, and to the farmers and ranchers. Most of the things we buy accumulate direct and indirect labor costs that add up to 85% of the selling price before taxes are added. Generally speaking, a wage raise means a corresponding rise in prices, unless productivity is increased proportionately.
What do you want, a guy with 4 arms? 4 arms? Say, I got a sensational idea.
To expand productivity, labor and management must work together to develop new ideas and techniques. To expand productivity, capital must finance the creation of more efficient tools and plants. The production of more and better goods at lower costs means that when you get a wage raise, it's a real raise.
A raise? A raise? I want to buy a doll. How much?
Now you've got a real wage raise.
Wow.
Because you can buy more with what you earn. With increased productivity, wages can keep ahead of prices.
So just quickly, a little bit more about the producer here. Sutherland, born in 1910, he actually worked for Disney and was an assistant director on the 1942 Bambi film. So that's a very direct connection, and one reason why the skill and the production quality is what it is and is as effective as it was. He ended up doing work for, there was a question about who was funding this. This one came out of Harding College, which was that conservative Christian college that was part of what Franz Wolf talks about as the one of the main outlets and mechanisms for spreading the gospel of capital. But it says here, where did it go? Just some of the Sloan Foundation. Okay, here we go. General Electric, United Fruit, American Telephone and Telegraph. I mean, these, of course, this is Dulles and the CIA. DuPont Motors, the New York Stock Exchange. You know, that he did work for all of them. And as I said, if you look at the link in the show description, you'll see that some of the videos that he produced with the same message were sponsored by the Air Force, the Chamber of Commerce, and ultimately, either directly or indirectly, in association with what Franz Wolf talks about, the National Association of Manufacturers, who today are still active in producing a lot of the PR for the business community. There is actually somebody, I meant to bring this up when talking about the advertising, but this was sent to me, speaking of the language being transferred and in discussion. So there's this apparently your rights camp on IG hosting Know Your Rights Camp podcast, was hosting a discussion about financial literacy. And so if I could just backtrack quickly, because part of what I'm trying to talk about in this book chapter, and just demonstrate a little bit today, is that the messaging that is coming out of these most elite white conservative capitalist circles is transferable. And if anyone remembers when I talked about the buying power argument and specifically how Nielsen was not only, or is not only one of the main fonts of the mythology around Black people having this buying power, but one of the things that I talked about that they did was engage in the development of the conscious consumer when talking to Black people, and that this was part of a campaign that they had developed to promote financial literacy to Black audiences. And their argument was, I'm just going to see if I can pull it up right quick. I'll just show here, because this I thought was a nice, timely. So in Nielsen at the time, working with the NNPA in producing the African American Consumer Report, and that is the National Newspapers Association, which is the leading association of Black newspaper publishers in the country. The two had conspired, in their language, strategically collaborated for 3 years to present an annual in-depth analytical report on the African American consumer, unsurpassed by any other similar product on the market. The reports have become widely respected industry chronicles touted for their exclusive insights, data, trends, and perspectives that better prepare marketers, is what I'm sure that's meant to say, and brands to connect with the audience segment. By concurrently sharing the report with millions of readers around the country, we have also helped create conscious consumers who are aware now more than ever how their economic power has a direct impact on the marketplace. So, and that's just one example. There's at least one other that I look at where Nielsen had a campaign. Yeah, here it is. And I wonder if let's see if the link still works, because in fact, another of those national news items came just 1 month later during Black History Month. Nielsen produced a fresh video promoting their Conscious Consumer campaign, featuring Black millennials excitedly describing how their buying power was a reflection of an advancing Black consciousness and pride. In the video description, Nielsen is honoring Black History Month by celebrating the culture, influence, and increasingly significant role of African American consumers. In our video series, 4 millennial conscious consumers discuss their buying habits as it relates to this new Black power. Does it still? Let me see if I can. But in any event, so all right, I can't, it doesn't matter. So then I get sent this the other day from this Know Your Rights camp, and Melissa explains how to use money as a tool. And listen,
when we talk about money, financial literacy, saving, it's always like, don't spend your money, right? And there's no way you need to spend your money if you're going to be really good at money.
Yeah.
But I really want to start off that conversation. And there's a difference in value spending and being a conscious consumer and really navigating your money and building wealth while still spending on things you enjoy. So it's important to start the conversation there so they know and they leave understanding what money is, how to use it as.
So I don't know what she says beyond the clip, but in this clip, the money as a tool is spending wisely. So she's not saying don't spend. She's saying we're told financial literacy means saving your money. But almost perfectly making my argument without making it, maybe intending to, is that financial literacy is only meant to help Black people, in this case, and others, spend money into the economy that they do not own, control, or benefit from, while having that expense justified and even targeted as the source for blame as to why Black people are unequal. Because you can't save money for the economy. The economy will die if you save money. The economy needs you to spend. It needs us all to spend. If we stop spending, the economy crashes, and those who own the economy don't benefit from material redistribution or the accumulation of the wealth created from our labor, and the immaterial attachment and control in managing our day-to-day lives through our selling our labor, chasing bills, not trying to avoid trouble so we can keep our health care and our jobs. That's okay. So she has to say, and because the conscious consumer is itself a marketing and advertising, branding phrase and concept that Nielsen developed intentionally to target Black people who have been studied as being susceptible to this apparently for 150 years, to say that if you target Black people's pride and culture, it doesn't matter if they don't own anything involved. It doesn't matter if they don't benefit financially or collectively or financially, even individually. It only matters as a mechanism to get them to feel better about performing their necessary duty, which is to spend in the economy. So, and to see her saying, I want to, so I don't know if this is a conscious relationship, if she's another version of the people in the video I was referencing from almost a decade ago now, or if she's just caught up in if she's the fish in the water who did not discover her environment, as McLuhan said, because it's a pervasive environment, is always beyond perception. And we're just regurgitating, which is part of the point I'm making anyway, about certainly the students in my classroom, regurgitating messaging that comes from 100 years ago, white business community. And we're meant to think of it as our own original thought. So again, just to wrap what I was trying to say today, the inherent tensions created by capitalism between labor and ownership are targeted for balancing by propaganda. Society is only held together by propaganda. The contradictions are clear otherwise. So the only thing that's not clear is exactly what we're supposed to do about it and what we can do about it. Or we're convinced that we are our own problem and that there is no real problem. Labor Day is itself a co-optation meant to balance by way of distortion the contradictions caused by exploited labor and ultimately to erase memory of the labor movement and ongoing struggle. The movement to free labor has been suppressed, erased, and commemorated by a holiday which further exploits workers by claiming, in addition to the material extraction, the symbolism of their contribution to this quote-unquote great country. Black capitalism and its symbolizing Black liberation is a very white-derived idea and one meant to forever prevent meaningful change. And then lastly, it's very weird for me to hear these very white male affluent messages created in the 1950s and earlier, almost verbatim in the arguments of Black and poor students in 2024 in my classroom. And yet all of these arguments, versions of them I've heard just last week. If it's not for Bezos and that capital investment and leadership, workers, we're basically useless. The society that produced the context for an Amazon is irrelevant. It's almost as if society only exists because of Amazon. And that was very much the idea in some of my student comments. So just a couple questions I caught that I wanted to, or comments I wanted to highlight before I come back to any more, and then we can wrap and get on with our hopefully is at least a day off. When would they play these cartoons back then in the morning? So I'm not entirely sure if it was just morning. I'm sure some of them were played in movie theaters, schoolhouses, because a big part of what Franz Wolf talks about is the role of the schoolhouse. And they would play them in they would also likely play them in church and religious gatherings. They would be played, in some cases, they would be played in factories for workers. So Franz Wolf talks about how factories and businesses working collectively under the guidance in many ways of the National Association of Manufacturers, they would create Labor Days, picnics, extended lunches where the workers would be invited to gather, and they would be provided all kinds of propaganda, from literature to films, short films, these kinds of cartoons, all kinds of stuff. So they would have their families there. So she talks about that as well. So they were likely played, and then what I just briefly looked up in some preparation for this morning, it says Sutherland's films specifically were seen by millions around the country. So again, they had the backing of all the leading business and military in the United States, and I'm sure had no problem finding an audience. And Josh's comment here, interesting how they're aware of contradictions like automation replacing labor and have myths ready to go to explain them. That's exactly one of the points that I'm trying to highlight. That's what these cartoons, that's what all propaganda is designed to do. That they are aware of the contradictions. They're scared of them. Franz Wolf is talking about they're talking about a coming civil war. They're talking of it in terms of intellectual reconquests and uncontrollable disturbances. So they're very much aware of it, and we're seeking, I think, these cartoons we get to watch and have, I hope, a little bit of fun with, are the sort of that first, at least in terms of post-World War II, that first wave of laying that foundation. And then certainly one or two, my generation for sure, was raised in the next stage. And today, some of these foundations are taken for granted, and find new ways to be. And I think it's more scandalous now. The propaganda is more scandalous now. That was very overt. We need to red waves and crashing. They had to be kind of overt. Now it's in many ways a little more subdued. Although I don't know. Dre, without Dr. Ball, when you get a chance, look up The Band 11, the most fire and bigoted cartoons you'll ever see. Great music, disgusting displays of African people. Absolutely. I'm not sure. I haven't seen those. Shout out to my man, Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, who years ago was among the first to get me to focus on some of that history. But yeah, and I'm not meaning, of course, to ignore that today per se, but given that it was Labor Day and the particular focus of this chapter I'm supposed to be working on, I wanted to focus sort of more broadly on what Franz Wolf is talking about was done to well, primarily the white worker, probably to bring them in line so that they would be there to defend against any questions of black labor and anything specific to the colonized. But yeah. And maybe one day we'll find a time and we'll gather those cartoons and have another fun morning. And yeah, I just caught this. I like, a couple of you pointed out that the darkness of the silhouettes may have been the one moment of black appearance in these films. Convenient Silhouettes, is that a name of anything? I think that would be a great book title or chapter title for a discussion of this. Can I take that? Has that been has that been taken yet? I kind of like that. Convenient Silhouettes. Somebody let me know if I'm only stealing from the chat, that's one thing. If I'm only stealing from Andre, thank you. That's one thing. But if I'm stealing from the broader world, I need to know. No, I like that. So, okay, good people. Really, I appreciate you coming through this morning. This has been few things I think would be more fun for me. So please accept my gratitude and accept my invitation for any of you who have not yet done so to like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon of this platform. Put this in your socials, share this with others. I'm sure some of them could use a little bit, if not the political education, a little laugh, a little giggle, because we all know what it is out here. We all know what it is out here. Thank you very much, Stoner Loner. Peace to everyone. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for the thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Alex, for the name. And yes, Uncle Truth, I did. There's a lot I got to catch up to, and I get it. There's some interesting criticisms of Cedric Robinson, but I mentioned the other day, Dr. CBS had one that I saw a couple of years ago that was dope. So I'm not running from it. I'm happy to engage. Just please give me some, bear with me. As you see, I'm a little bit focused on something else here. I can't tackle Cedric Robinson at the moment as well, but I appreciate you. And no, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate you. The kind words. Please, again, support the platform however you can. Thanks, Josh. Big shout out to Black Men Build and all the great work they're doing, and everybody. Please go check that conversation with Warsami Burton if you haven't seen it from the other day at Curb Fest. Shout out to Curb Fest. That was, oof. All right, everybody. Like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, do all the things. Peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you next time right here at
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
What do you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, 12. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.